everyone, and welcome to Samantha Politics, a show where we talk about global politics and women's rights. We have a great show coming up.
On the military for the genocide against the Rohingya. So
as these poor people are being attacked, people are hiding in their offices. You guys saw a guest.
We're going to be talking about Burma and Russia today, but just a quick U.S. Native American Secretary of the Interior. Now, this is really monumental because
I'm Samantha Carlin, your host of Samantha Politics, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Samantha Politics, your source for global politics with a focus on women's rights, where you learn about the world outside of America. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I have two amazing guests waiting in the wings to help us learn more about what's happening in Afghanistan with the wake of the United States pullout from the country. We're going to get to that in a second. First, let's go over some global news updates. Zach, if you could cue the Met Gala slideshow. So I'm going to be honest, I think this may be one of the only times that I talk about pop culture. So I hope you get your fill. What I do love about this, though, is so the Met Gala just happened, which is a huge kind of fashion who's who, looking at the outrageous things people wear and designers, et cetera, et cetera. But a couple women chose to make political statements with their attire. I think this is really cool because I truthfully think that the point of fame is to create social change. And if you are famous and your only purpose is to wear pretty clothes and have everybody say how gorgeous you are, I don't really think you're making that much of a difference. So I love that a couple women chose to use this very high profile event to make a political statement. So a couple of those included Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a New York representative, and Carolyn Maloney. You can see on let's just say AOC. That's why everyone calls her AOC for short. It's easier to say. You can see on AOC's gorgeous white dress, tax the rich, which is part of her whole ethos. Tax the rich is really about, she says, about taxing millionaires and billionaires, not the upper middle class. But it's a reflection of the growing income inequality that we've been seeing in the United States that's only been exacerbated by COVID, where the rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer, and the gap between the rich and the poor has gone just out of control. AOC is saying the time is now for childcare, healthcare, and climate action for all. Now, Carolyn Maloney, who you can see with the green dress that kind of looks like a sachet, and it says ERA on her dress. Now, that stands for Equal Rights Amendment. And it says, ERA, yes. Now, this is the addition of an amendment to the Constitution which would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. The ERA was actually first proposed in the 1920s, and women's rights activists have been fighting to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed for years. Now, it almost happened in the 70s, but because of women like Phyllis Schlafly and the anti-abortion movement or the anti-choice movement, there were several key states that did not vote yes on the ERA, and the ERA as yet has still not been approved, and it's a little bit ridiculous. It's kind of time for this to be added to our Constitution. I don't know why there's any sort of debate over whether people should be discriminated against on behalf of sex. Clearly, that's something that should not happen. Lastly, we had actress Cara Delevingne, who showed up in a white bulletproof vest that says "Peg the Patriarchy," which was designed by Dior's Maria Grazia Chiori. And she said in an interview that her look is all about women's empowerment and gender equality. She also says, I think this is funny, that "Peg the Patriarchy" to her is similar to stick it to men. But the idea basically being like, it's time to dismantle the patriarchy. It's time for equal rights for women, and to not kind of keep holding up this patriarchy on this high shelf where they're untouchable and women are down here. Moving on to Germany. So Angela Merkel has become this icon of European politics. There are so many iconic images of her as like the only woman at the G7. Her, kind of intentional lack of style and really focus on politics, her kind of dryness and her lack of willingness to kind of fall into the celebrity category as some other leaders have done, like Macron and Trudeau. She's become an icon. Her openness to refugees and the willingness of Germany to take in tons and tons and tons and tons of Syrian refugees when a lot of other countries were closing their borders. That act of compassion, I personally think, was really tremendous, tremendous, tremendous. Well, after 16 years, she's finally stepping down, and elections are going to be held next week. And hopefully, we'll be doing a show with a Germany expert in the following week to talk about the results of those elections. Something that's really important this year, especially to young people, is the climate and climate change. And have actually been a bunch of teenagers, and kudos to them, that have been on a hunger strike for the last 2 weeks to say that they want to see climate change occupy a more central role in the different parties' stances, and they want to see that come front and center. This example was really set by Greta Thunberg that showed that teens can make a difference. You don't have to be Alexandria Ocasio Cortez at the Met Gala to make a difference. You could also be a kid on a hunger strike or sitting outside Parliament with a sign for 16 days, and people will finally pay attention to you. So I think that the power of youth activism is really amazing, since they are the next generation of Germany and they are incredibly socially progressive, especially in the wake of Yom Kippur. And it is Erev Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is tomorrow, which means the Day of Atonement for the Jewish community. I think Germany's also done a really amazing job in terms of educating its citizens to be really aware of the Holocaust and aware of Judaism, and actually more empathetic and I think, to Jews sometimes than Americans are, or more aware of anti Semitism and how that takes place. I don't actually think Americans are all that aware of that. So the predicted outcome of the election will be that Armin Laschet, the leader of the CDU, will assume the chancellor position. Again, we'll see in a few weeks, but a major, major, major transition for Germany and for the entire EU and transatlantic relations, because Angela Merkel has really been a figurehead in our relationship in terms of the US's relationship with the EU for so many years now. So why is climate change so important to these young people all of a sudden? Well, if you live in New York, you've seen it. If you live in Louisiana, you've seen it. If you live in California, you're constantly checking the air quality to see how are the fires. I was just in California last week having lunch with a friend who had to escape and evacuate from his house in Tahoe because it was literally Tahoe is under massive, massive fires, the biggest they've ever seen. Fire season has become the norm in California. We saw Hurricane Ida with wrecking the New York subways. I mean, the images of water just up to here and pouring, gushing down the subways was just tremendous. New Orleans is still struggling, even with all of the things that they put into place with Hurricane Katrina. So another area of the world, it just seems to be spreading everywhere, is Spain's southern region of Andalusia, which is a region dear to my heart. There have been almost 3,000 Spaniards evacuated from the region and 1,000 emergency personnel working to stop the fire. In terms of Spanish history, this is one of the worst in Spanish history of the country, destroying over 18,000 acres of land. I think Spain is particularly at risk because it's a very dry climate, so there's not much rain or moisture to put those fires out. Also, sadly, the fire was actually started deliberately. So, I just can't understand the people that are climate change deniers are saying that climate change isn't real. All you have to do is like realize that, hey, we're in Washington, D.C., and it's September 15th, and it was 93 degrees today. Something is wrong. Or to see the blazing wildfires. There's just no way that you could say that climate change isn't real if you have eyes. if you really watch, if you live in any place that's coastal or dry, climate change is hitting everywhere, and it does need to be incredibly important within our stances. Lastly, an issue that has been upsetting many women's rights activists, including myself, is the passage of a new law in Texas that bans abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Most women don't even know that they are pregnant at 6 weeks of pregnancy. If you think about how pregnancy works, many women wait for a missed period. Women can get their periods anytime between every 4 to sometimes even 8 weeks. If you don't necessarily know you missed your period, you might not even know you're pregnant, especially if you're a victim of rape or incest, which guess what? There are no allowances in the law for rape and incest, which is just crazy to say that you would want somebody to have a baby that there's a higher likelihood of genetic diseases when it comes to incest because it's the same gene pool, or to say that you would want somebody to have to bear the child of the person that raped them. It's just disgusting and unbelievable. The law also provided a very weird provision which has enabled a whole cadre of vigilantes and bounty hunters, basically saying that any person can sue somebody that they think had an abortion, or they can sue the Uber driver that took them to get the abortion, the nurse that examined them, their mother who gave them advice to get the abortion. Anybody who abetted with the abortion can now be a criminal. In addition, those vigilantes, if they go to court and sue somebody, they can actually get paid at least $10,000 plus have their legal fees paid for. So this is going to overwhelm the court systems. There are already clinics in Oklahoma and Louisiana, which were already overloaded because there's not that many in those states, are totally overloaded with patients coming from Texas. And there was an opportunity for the Supreme Court to basically block this law from going into effect. And in a 5-4 ruling, they did not block it. Why? Our favorite women's rights activist, Amy Coney Barrett. This woman is just. I'm sorry, but I'm embarrassed to even call her a woman because she doesn't stand for anything that I stand for, and she certainly is not a feminist, and she certainly doesn't stand for women's rights. It's just a shame. Brett Kavanaugh, also, our favorite guy who went on trial. I still believe Christine Blasey Ford. There have actually been protesters protesting outside of his house in Maryland. I don't really understand why they wouldn't just block the law from going into effect when it's clearly unconstitutional and wait for it to play out, because basically that's what it would do. It'd stop it from going into effect until it gets to the Supreme Court or gets to another court where it can then be looked at and there can be a whole thing. And they just kind of went silent on it and gave very little reason for why they did not block this law from going into effect, which is already having abortions clinics closing, women that are fleeing to other places to get abortions. It's putting women's health on the line. It's extremely unhealthy, for example, a woman who's 17 or 18 to even hold a child and bring it to birth. There's a lower chance, they have a chance of retardation, lower birth weight, maternal and or infant mortality. Pregnancy is not an easy thing. It's not the stork bringing the baby and putting it on the step. It's a very traumatic experience for a woman's body. And so to put women through that, I just think is unconscionable. In addition, all of these pro-life, quote unquote pro-life people don't seem to think about the rights of the child that's going to be born, and or the rights of the woman to have the right to choose. But especially looking at the child, my argument would be, if you're going to say, okay, you have to bear this child, then you should also set up a college fund for $150,000 to pay for that kid's college. And you should also advocate for the increase of welfare to pay for more children who are then born, who, if a woman or family cannot afford them, basically should not have been born, is now born. But it's like they only care about this when it's in the womb. They don't actually care about it when it becomes a child and has a real life. And I find that really upsetting as someone who did my master's thesis on victims of rape and the pregnancies that come from it, children born of wartime rape. I can tell you their lives are not pleasant, not just from wartime rape, but from rape. Their lives are not pleasant. Okay, but who is coming to the rescue? So this is a touch of irony. Who's coming to the rescue on the Texas abortion case? Merrick Garland, who, if you might remember, was supposed to be on the Supreme Court. And if the Senate had done their job and confirmed him, he would be in the Supreme Court, and it would have been 5-4 the other way, ruling in favor of stopping the Texas abortion ban. So we can see how, even though the Supreme Court is not supposed to be partisan, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett clearly are incredibly partisan. Merrick Garland is heading up a Department of Justice lawsuit against this law, and he's asking, in the meantime, while the lawsuit plays out, to for a federal judge in Texas to again block the law from to temporarily block enforcement of the state's new law. So another lot of ironic things happening. In another stroke of irony, a few days after Texas put this law in place, Mexico decriminalized abortion. Now, Mexico had been, by criminalizing abortion, been similar to Texas in that a woman could be taken to trial and put into jail for having had an abortion. And there were all these horrible cases of women who, had who lost their babies because of miscarriages, and then they would find them in the toilet and someone would say, we're putting you in prison for, having had an abortion, and they're like, well, I don't even know what's going on. Just really horrifying circumstances. This was a huge victory for the women's rights movement in Mexico, who has been pushing against femicide, which is startlingly high, and that means the murder of women in Mexico. It's been startlingly high for years and only going up. And it's a victory for the Mexican women's rights movement. You might also remember we did something about Argentina legalizing abortion. So I think these heavily Catholic countries are now starting to come around. Also, wouldn't it be ironic if Mexico now built a wall so that Texans couldn't get over the border? We'll see how this plays out. Next week, we're going to have an advocacy expert from the Center for Reproductive Rights to talk us through the Texas abortion ban and the relationship to Mexico and what's going on there. On to our main story. If you could put up that picture of Rohila's family, please. In our last episode, we heard from Rohila Berhanzoy, a lawyer from Afghanistan. At the time, I remember just feeling her tension as I talked to her because her family was literally at the airport, like about to get on a plane to Qatar. And it's not done until it's done. They did make it to Qatar. They finally made it to Ramstein, Germany. And this is a picture of them. They're finally in Canada. I'm just so delighted. So many people have not been able to get out of the country, and to see Rohila's family reunited in Canada is just really great. And congratulations to Rohila and her family. And I wish the best for them. So, what else is happening in Afghanistan now that the US has removed almost all traces of its presence? Well, the Taliban government has taken hold. Since the Taliban took Kabul, it's set up an interim government, which I know you're going to be really shocked is all male, with just a handful of Tajik and Uzbek representatives and no members of the ethnic Hazara minority. Also, I know this is also going to shock you. The Ministry of Women's Affairs didn't make it into the Taliban government. I know, real shocker, right? However, the ministry, this sounds like something out of Harry Potter. The Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice has come into the Taliban government. So much more important, obviously, than the Ministry of Women's Affairs is making sure that virtue is propagated, whatever that means. 3 days ago in Kandahar province, 3,500 people living in a government owned residential area have been given 3 days to leave by the Taliban. In terms of women, then this is from a source on the ground. She says that every day new rules and restrictions are set for women. We can't even go out for our initial needs. Women are afraid of the Taliban, and even they themselves have decided to be at their homes and have left their jobs, universities, and all the places they used to go. In particular, the Hazara minority is facing a lot of persecution. They always have, but it has increased. People have been killed for raising the flag of Afghanistan, for talking to relatives, for talking to people in the US, for having relationships with people in the States, for texting someone in the US. So even though the Taliban has said that they've granted amnesty, it's looking like that's not the case. And we're going to ask Yalda about that in a bit. There's also the winter closing in on the country, with the UNHCR warning that 97% of the country is at risk of being under poverty in the coming months, or under the poverty line in the coming months. 97%. And this is also problematized because a lot of the mechanisms that were providing aid now don't want to provide aid because they don't want it to go through the Taliban government because of what the Taliban government does and its oppression of women. But unfortunately, the impact is that it hits the people and it doesn't necessarily hurt the Taliban. But something that's been really amazing is the fact that women have been protesting. And so you can see in some of these photos that a lot of women are unwilling to go back to this archaic, sexist, misogynist, repressive Taliban type of regime. They want to keep their rights. Zach, if you could put up that next slideshow of the women in the beautiful dresses. In addition, in breaking news, in less than 24 hours, a campaign went up on Twitter called hashtag do not touch my clothes, where Afghan women are showing photos of themselves in beautiful ornate Afghan gowns, extremely colorful. And I just love the paradigm of this against, with their hair flowing against this kind of concept that even I think the West has sometimes of Afghan women as being all in black, just in burqas. So this has been a really, I think, heartening campaign of resistance that Afghan women have put up onto the internet. So I'm going to stop talking because we have more interesting guests than me in the wings. So, waiting in the wings, I have an amazing Afghan women's rights activist who's just escaped the country, and another amazing woman, the executive director of a really cool NGO working to stop violence against women and girls. And they're waiting to come on the show next. But before we bring them in, I just want to give a brief word from our sponsor, James Anthony Jewelers. So, James literally designs and creates custom engagement rings by himself. He's been doing it for over 20 years. And what I think is really cool is you have the option to have ethically made diamonds. So they're actually created in a lab and thus they're conflict free and not fueling the conflicts in Africa that we talk about sometimes that are aided by the diamond trade. Also, because he doesn't have a storefront shop, he can offer lower prices than his competitors, much lower. So what a lot of James's clients do is they bring a picture of a ring to him or they texted him and they say, I found this ring on the Tiffany's website or whatever, I want a ring that looks like this, and he'll make it for a fraction of the price. Personally, I think it's a no-brainer. Overnight shipping anywhere in the United States of America. And he's a small business owner located in the DC area. Really great guy. His rings are absolutely gorgeous. I'm not engaged yet. I don't have a fiance, but you know, it once I think that that's in the forecast, I'm definitely going to send him with the ring that I want to James so that James can make my engagement ring. So thank you so much, James, for generously sponsoring Samantha Politics. And we're going to put his website in the chat. It's jamesanthony.com, JAEMS Anthony.com. And you can either go to his website or message him on Instagram in order to give him your perfect ring that you want. Alrighty. Let's bring in our guests. So both of our guests are from a really awesome feminist organization called Voice, which is working to end violence against women and girls in conflict, crisis, and disaster settings. They are a team of skilled humanitarians with extensive experience working on violence against women and girls in emergency contexts. They are working to help meet the needs of women and girl led organizations in a ton of countries, including Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, the United States, Venezuela, and Yemen. Our first guest, Mehndi Marsh, is the co founder and executive director of Voice. She has over 20 years of experience in researching, programming, and leading work to promote gender equity and strengthening efforts to end violence against women and girls globally, including in conflict, crisis, and disaster settings. Mendy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Samantha. Great to be here.
I'm so delighted to have you, and just been so inspired by the amazing work that you do.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Yalda. Miss Yalda Royan is a senior women's rights activist with 16 years of experience in senior advisory and management positions with local and international NGOs. Her background includes expertise in designing and leading gender initiatives, women's empowerment and equality initiatives, gender and civil society advocacy, women's political participation, gender mainstreaming, gender-based violence, conflict resolution, and peace and security. She's one of the few women's rights activists who holds a master's degree in gender and women's studies from Kabul University. Welcome to the show, Yalda.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you.
So I'm so delighted to have you both here. So we saw some pictures of you from before. Yalda, so can you tell us, you just got out of Afghanistan, is that correct?
Yeah, thank you for using the right word. Got out of Afghanistan. I didn't escape. They made us get out of Afghanistan.
Thank you for making that clarification. Absolutely, that you got out. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey getting out of the country?
Yeah, so with the security getting worse, some of my sister feminist allies from Voice and other networks, they started to work on helping me and my two teenage daughters to get out of Afghanistan. And then it was 18th of August. We were actually told in advance to be ready with just one backpack, and as soon as they tell us we have to leave home. So it was 18th of August around noon when I got a call from this sister, and she asked me to head towards airport. And then it was the start of the journey. We arrived at the Kabul airport, outside of the Kabul airport, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had to spend 8.5 hours there in the crowd, pulling and pushing and running over us with the gunfires happening around. And finally, it was 10:30 p.m. in the night when we were able to enter the airport. And then I spent 2 more days inside Kabul airport. After that, we were taken by
Wow.
white,
Sorry,
um,
you were taken by a what?
a military plane.
A military plane?
So we were taken to Kuwait. Kuwait didn't let us get out of their base, the Canadian base that we had landed. From there, another military plane took us to Bahrain. Then we spent 2 days in Bahrain, and then finally, a commercial plane took us to Dallas Airport, and it was 24th of August in the afternoon when I arrived in Virginia.
Welcome, Yalda, to America. Mendy, can you talk about? I know you helped Yalda and have been helping other women get out of the country. Can you talk about the role that advocacy efforts have played?
Sure. Thanks, Samantha. Yalda is she and I've talked a lot about this. We're so grateful that Yalda was able to get out, and that in many ways she's a really unique case, right? We have lots of women that we're in daily contact with, who we're helping every way that we can. We're staying in contact with them and being led by what they feel is safe in terms of how they communicate with us. We're trying to help them get the latest information that we can get for them so that they can make the most informed decisions that they possibly can, because the challenges that they're faced with are extreme. Women who have had any association with the United States are trying to get rid of any link to the United States, right? They are really cautious about how they're communicating, who they're communicating with. Sometimes they're getting rid of phones, burning documents. So their lives are at extreme risk just because they have worked for the US government. So we really are following their lead. And, we're able to do small things given the magnitude of the problem. But, as long as they keep fighting and standing up for what they know is necessary for themselves, their families, and their country, we will be right there alongside them.
It's amazing, Mendy. Yalda, I know that when you were in Afghanistan, you were the in-country lead for Afghanistan. Can you tell us what you were doing there?
Organizations to each other, not only inside Afghanistan, but also to the other countries that Voice is working with, assessing their capacity needs and also providing them with some capacity development opportunities, specifically in terms of security, how to be analyzing their security situation, not only as a woman rights activist, but also as an organization who is um, working for women's rights. These were some of the activities that I was leading in Afghanistan.
So, as I was talking to both of you, what can a women's rights activist do at this point to, if you're teaching them security, what can be done at this point to, keep their security?
Is this question to me?
To Yalda, yeah.
I was telling Mendy the other day that we Afghan women are now experts of security. They know much more than us um,
Mm,
to be providing any trainings for them. When I was talking about security training, it was before this chaos that is now happening in Kabul. So that time it was something that we could help them with, to do the security analysis, to take measures on how to stay safe and how to use social media to be consider the cybersecurity and to save their data and these things. These were some of the things that we are doing right now. No security training would be kind of useful or helpful, because security is now gone from Afghanistan. We don't know if providing a training will not help anyone, not a woman, not a man.
mm. Mendy, are you doing anything to kind of like, I mean, even I think myself as well, a lot of us in America have gotten messages from people that are really desperate and their lives are at threat by the Taliban. Is there anything that, advice that you've been giving to women that, people watching this show might be able to heed that's helpful?
I mean, I think the big thing that the voice team has really been talking about lately is compassionate communication. If they want to be in touch with you and they feel that that is a safe thing to do, be show them compassion, show them care. Like I that's doesn't seem like a big thing, but I think Yalda and I've talked about it. It does matter. It does give people hope to have that connection, and I think that it's important for Afghans, especially Afghan women's rights defenders, to know that we are trying what we can do. We're trying to figure things out. We are trying to advocate with different governments, especially the United States, to make good decisions, to be informed by Afghan women, so that we can hopefully reignite what could be evacuations, safe passage to the United States or other countries. And we can't do that if we're not following their lead, right? And understanding
Mm,
what their realities are like.
mm. So let's go there, Yalda. So what are you hearing from, or what were you experiencing as the Taliban took over on the ground? What are you hearing from your friends and relatives that are still in Afghanistan, especially the women?
Um, well, let's start from the national kind of level. Women are out of the government. They are not included in the governance. They are not They are not going to school. They have banned the girls from school over age of 12. Um, women's economy has gone worse. We had at least 200,000 families who were headed by women. So they have lost jobs in the last 1 month. Now consider what would be happening to their families. Even those who were working or who had some money inside the banks, they are not able to withdraw their money from the banks. They don't have access to physical money or to cash. Um, um, Women cannot go to work. They have been asked to wait until specific arrangements are taken or provided for women to be joining the workforce back. In Panjshir specifically, there is one province that is resisting the Taliban still. Women and children do not have access to medicine. They don't have access to food. They don't have even access to communication means. And security is very bad. These are some of the things that are happening right now. Women's rights activists are being threatened. They are not able to get out of their homes. They have been beaten. They have been abducted. Some of the women have been abducted in the northern province, Balkh. And these are some of the realities that are happening in Afghanistan right now.
Hmm. So you were saying, so there's this one province that's still resisting the Taliban, meaning the Taliban haven't been able to take over.
Yeah, it's Panjshir and existing. And
How have they been able to withhold, or how have they been able to put off the Taliban?
well, they have been fighting with the Taliban. Crisis is happening there. Human crisis is happening there. We are hearing that Taliban are killing civilians in this province. And it is everywhere on the news that this one province has decided that it is the Tajik ethnicity who is saying that no to Taliban and to Pakistan, and they don't want to surrender, or they don't want their province to be captured by Taliban.
So let's take a quick pause and let's play that video. I don't, is it from the province, Yalda, or is it from another area? The video of the women's rights activists.
It is
Pardon?
from the capital.
It's from the capital. But let's play that video. Let's see these people that are protesting.
گرفتی عکس؟ میگرفتی دا بده دیگه چیزا خودت شما دیگه خب میگرفتید دویزی چرا نگرفتید؟
So Yalda, can you tell us what's going on in that protest?
Yes, a group of women were protesting for their right to education, their right to work, their right to political participation, and then they're being physically abused, and they're actually recording this video kind of hiddenly so that the Taliban do not notice it. You might have news that 5 of the journalists from one of the very famous local news agencies were beaten and leashed and very brutally abused and um, physically abused because they were covering the women's protest. So that's
Wow.
secretly recording this scene.
What so one of the things that's been reported is that there was also a protest in favor of the Taliban by a group of women. Do you
Yeah.
know anything? Do those women actually like the Taliban?
Yeah, I don't oppose them. It is their choice. It is a
Hmm.
group of extremist women who have decided to be as slaves, who have decided to wear those black burqas and cover themselves, their appearance, and just raise their voice to talk in favor of the Taliban. That's their own choice. We don't have any objection on that.
Hmm.
They have the right to choose anyone to follow and to support. But it is a very little minority.
Hmm.
They're not more than 100 or 150 women who cannot be representing 15 to 16 million women in Afghanistan.
Wow.
They
Wow.
represent me.
But the image the Taliban obviously wants to represent is saying that, showing all these women that love them versus the women that are protesting against them and not happy with their rule.
Sorry, I couldn't get your question.
So no, just that the Taliban obviously wants to highlight the women that support them and think they're great versus the women that oppose them.
Of course, that's something they would do, and I'm sure you have learned today that the deputy for the head of cabinet, Mullah Ghani Baradar, has been one of the 100 influential faces or personalities by Times, which is shocking, which is confusing me as a woman. Like, what is happening? On one side, US is saying, and the international community is saying that Taliban are brutal, they are not, they are a group of terrorists. And on the other hand, one of these Talib leaders is becoming one of the influential, 100 influential faces or personalities. Controversial. Everything is just controversial, and you can't understand what is really happening.
Mendy, do you have any perspective on that? On his appointment?
I do not. I'm not gonna pretend that I do, Samantha, because I'm as confused by that as Yalda is. It doesn't make any sense.
So is this guy a Taliban leader? Who is he?
He is a Talib leader, yeah. He is right now there is a cabinet and there is a head of cabinet. And this guy is the deputy for that head of cabinet. So right now there is no government in Afghanistan, you know. It is not emirate, it is not republic, it is nothing. There's just a bunch of people coming together as a so-called cabinet, and one person is heading them, and there is the deputy, and this deputy is just out of a sudden And to shock us, he becomes the one of the 100 influential faces in the Times.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Uh, let's just see. So something else that the Taliban has claimed, Yalda, is that that women are allowed to travel alone as long as it's trips for under 3 days. Is that? Do you know anything about that?
I haven't heard anything about it.
Okay. And one more question is that the Taliban has also told Western news media that it's granted amnesty to everybody that's helped, the U.S. Army or the Allies in the past. Allies, not World War II. It's helped the Western governments in the past. Do you think that this is actually the case that they're going to not persecute people that help the U.S. government or other foreign governments?
Well, what's happening in the ground is totally different from this statement. They have been searching homes of the people who have been working for the government or for the US. And this amnesty is something just right now to please the international community or the other countries to recognize them. It is just to form their government. It is nothing to be happening. At least I don't believe that this happened. And in reality, also, Taliban are divided into two groups. One is the Haqqani network, and the other is the followers of Mullah Omar. So this Haqqani network has always had difficulties and problems with the government, and now the conflict between them is on this amnesty as well. So this group will never forgive the people who have worked for the government and the U.S. government, which is now happening really in the ground, and they are killing people because of their jobs, their former duties.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I just even to my inbox, I've been receiving people have sent me actual letters threatening to kill them from the Taliban. People have sent me videos of funerals of their relatives that have been killed by the Taliban. I mean, just really shocking and upsetting. I know some people from Amnesty International were recently killed by the Taliban. So, it's. I think it's going to be an interesting test for the U.S. government of what do we believe versus like when is it wishful thinking to believe what the Taliban says versus like actually realizing that they can't be trusted, frankly, and that they're just saying things to appease the international community. So what do you think? Do. So one other thing that we talked about is, how do you feel like Afghan women's rights activists have been ignored throughout this, and how might they have prevented this from happening? Can be Yalda or Mendy.
Yalda, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so, since 2019, the peace talks started, and we very quickly noticed that women are absent at the table. And we started our advocacy, and we wrote pieces in the international media. We had interviews. We kind of met with the politicians. We started a lot of efforts to bring women in. Um, and as a result, we had 4 women included in the negotiation team to be discussing with the Taliban in the last 9-10 months. And we also had been in contact with these women and also the other negotiation team members to kind of shape the outcomes and put our red lines for the women. But actually, none of these worked, and we knew it from the beginning also, and finally also it was clear that women's rights is never a priority for the politicians, neither in Afghanistan nor in the US, and nor
Hmm.
in Qatar, who was hosting the peace discussions, and specifically to Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the U.S. Representative for the peace for Afghanistan. And today I had a tweet about this, and I asked Ms. Cheryl Bernard, his wife, and asked him, is she going to, even once for the sake of womanhood, ask her husband that what he did to the fate of Afghan women? And I hope she asks this question from her husband. And yeah, this is it.
What's so funny too is that there's so much research that having women as part of the peace talks makes it more likely for the agreement to be implemented. It makes it much more likely that peace will actually still be there in 5 years. It makes it more likely that there's community buy-in. It makes it more likely that there won't be a resurgence in conflict. So all the research shows that women need to be at the peace talks, but it seems like in this case the UN was just, or the US was just kowtowing to the Taliban and thinking that, Trump thinking he was going to become buddies with him like he is with Kim Jong Un, and they were going to do whatever he wants, which was a huge mistake. Mendy, any perspective on this that you want to provide?
Well, I just think it's, when is it going to end, right? We know, as you said, Samantha, we know we have known conflict after conflict. We have data on this, as you've noted. So when are women going to be seen as the leaders that they are, as the leaders of, they are the front lines of crisis? We know that all over the world. We've seen that with COVID, right? Everywhere. The places that have better outcomes related to COVID are countries that are led by women, right? So when are men going to listen and make sure that women do have the platforms and the space to provide their leadership and to be listened to? And don't use us as tokens, right? Put us in a situation where we actually can be heard and lead the way that we know we can.
Why do you think, is it just, Mendy, as somebody who does a lot of work around these issues, why are women sidelined, in the broader kind of, is it patriarchy? Is it, what are your perspective on why women are constantly sidelined in the humanitarian space and peace talks?
I mean, that's one of the fundamental reasons why Voice exists, right? I've worked inside the UN system. I've worked inside of other institutions and organizations. And while we did get work done in some of those situations, I was repeatedly, year after year, watching the system sideline women and girls. The system is often still led by most majority white men who are making decisions on what they think the communities need, the people need that they're aiming to serve, right? They're not listening to women, because women know best. They know who is most at risk in their families, in their communities. We know when we get money into the hands of women, there's better decisions that are likely made. So we know all of this, right? But the system itself just, it doesn't do what they perceive maybe as hard to actually stop and listen to women-led organizations, allow them in the rooms where decision-making power and decisions are actually made, right? We know that the aid industry in itself is $1 billion system, right? We know that violence against women and girls gets exacerbated in almost all conflicts, crises, and disasters, but virtually way less than 1% of the money that goes into those systems is actually funneled to programs working on violence against women and girls. Things that are also perceived as more as life-saving, such as access to water and sanitation, education, etc. Yes, that is life-saving, but not being raped is life-saving for women.
Why do you think so many organizations struggle to get funding for that? I mean, it seems like it's a UN commitment, everybody talks about ending gender-based violence, but then there's not the financial commitment to back it.
No, I mean, I don't think we haven't even been close to the allocation of resources that would get, even get a tiny bit closer to matching the magnitude of the problem, right? We just aren't, we're not seeing that. There's a whole localization agenda within the humanitarian architecture. We're not achieving localization. The civil society organizations, especially women-led organizations, are still the least likely to get access to resources that would allow them to grow their movements, to grow their work, and become more sustainable and able to address violence against women and girls in bigger ways.
Thank you so much, Mendy. Yalda, I also want to, as this crisis, and Mendy pointed this out to me beforehand, so I just want to thank her for that. But to know that just because an Afghan is out of Afghanistan, it doesn't mean like celebration, like everything's okay, like life is perfect. So what does life look like for you now, kind of coming into this new country, and also for other women that are now resettling into the US or other European countries?
Well, starting the life from zero is always a challenge. Um, not only economically but also socially until you get settled in a new society. It is a stress, it is a time consuming process, and it is a kind of challenge and concern that you have. I was telling Mendy that everyone is not as lucky as me, who was surrounded by good people. I had Mendy and her friends who helped me with place, with um, starting the new life, enrolling my daughter to the school, like moving to this new place and settling and everything. A lot of other women don't have this opportunity. They need a lot of support economically, socially, legally, and everything is something that we need to provide for the woman. It is also good that I can speak English. There are women who even don't speak English, and for them, even language can be a barrier. So these are some of the challenges that a woman coming to a new society like the US, all the laws, the regulations that you guys have here, which doesn't exist in Afghanistan, these are all very new for us, and it's a kind of little difficult for us to adjust with everything. We are coming from a war-torn country where we have always been violent. We have been doing things with power and with our money, for example. But now coming to a country which is very legalized and everything is based on the law, it is a little difficult for both for men and women. But women will be facing a lot more problems.
What about visas? Do you have work visas?
Now we are on humanitarian parole.
So how long does it, I mean, so how are you expected to support yourself? Do you get financial aid, or what's how do you make a living?
As I told you, I was surrounded by good people, my friends, my colleagues, the new friends that I have made in Washington, D.C. and here. They have run fundraisings for me, and that's how I'm supporting right now. As I told in the beginning, when we left the country, we left only with a backpack where we had only one piece of cloth with ourselves.
Wow.
Banks were closed and we couldn't even withdraw enough money from there. So it was with the help of the family and the friends that I'm trying to establish again and resettle.
How's your daughter doing?
Um, just the day before yesterday, Facebook had reminded my elder daughter that she had started first year of university on the same day. And
Mm.
she was crying the whole day, and she was missing her university, her friends, her and until she goes back to university and makes new friends, it will be difficult for her. It's the elder one, and the younger one is just excited because she will be joining the school soon, and it is not easy for both of them as youth who are leaving everything behind and coming here. It is a little difficult for them.
Thanks so much, Yalda. And yeah, it's just amazing that, people have rallied up to support you. Mendy, there's other things that, Afghan, especially refugee women have to think about, especially in terms of violence against women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, here in the United States, and Yalda can speak more about this. We have to make we are going to see a lot of young and older women, Afghan women who are here in the United States, who are not going to be they may have disruptions in their families. They may have be around people that put their lives at threat. Their family members may not appreciate the social mixing that may happen. There may be honor killings and things like this that put women and girls at direct risk here in the United States if we are not being proactive, if we are not making sure that women and girls have access to information about services for violence that is in a language or in a way that they can actually access that information. There's just a whole spectrum of things that we need to be thinking about. Access to reproductive health services may be a significant challenge for Afghan women and girls who are here. People think that our services are easy to navigate for some Americans. Imagine having to figure out how to get health insurance or access any kind of health service when you just landed here in the United States. It's not an easy situation. Figuring out how to pay for those services. So there's a whole spectrum of things that we need to be proactive about, and to make sure that we are able to get necessary information to Afghan women and girls, and to help them see that there is a network of feminist allies across the United States. There's a network of organizations that are working in various ways on violence against women and girls. And we need to make sure that wherever Afghan women and girls land across the United States, that they have access to those support services, right? That
Yeah,
they're
we're there to
linked.
support them. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. And eh, I was telling the story of I was in New York once taking I was in New York City and I was taking signatures for an anti-human trafficking campaign, and this little boy was watching me. He was a African American. He was about 13. He was watching me all day. And finally came up to me and he said, "Do you know where the blah 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 shelter is, or something house?" And he didn't have a phone, and I looked it up on my phone, and he was nowhere near. I mean, he was like a 20-minute taxi ride from there. And I said, "Well," and I could see it was a homeless shelter. And I said, "Well, let me call before I like put you in a taxi over there to make sure that they have room for you and that everything's okay if you get there." He had come from an abusive household. He'd walked across the bridge from Brooklyn into New York City. He'd called his caseworker, but it was a Sunday and his caseworker didn't pick up. And I called this homeless shelter, and they said, "Sorry, we're full." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what do I do?" They're like, here's like two other shelters." So I called two other shelters. One's like, "Oh, we only take parents with children. We don't take children alone." And the other one was full. And then I was like, "Well, what am I supposed to do with this boy?" I mean, and he spoke English, but he didn't have a cell phone. He clearly didn't have money. What am I supposed to do? Just leave him on the street? And they were like, "Well, the police will come and give if he's homeless, they'll give him resources," which basically means show up with a sheet of paper and say, "Here's resources for you." homeless." I mean, I finally had to call 311. I had to call foster care. I made like 20 calls until finally, like, the police came, foster care services came, like, everything came. And I was like, "Promise me this boy is not going to be left on the street." But it was just such an example. This is in New York City. It was such an example of how broken the system is, and
Yep.
how, what if he didn't speak any English? He wouldn't have even been able to tell me where he was going or what his situation was. And it's yeah, it's really sad that it's that difficult to get access. I mean, there's this concept by the right that we're just like throwing out social services right and left to people, and that's just not the case. It's a backed up system full of bureaucracy, not enough money or resources. Have you ever been to a special victims unit, Mendy? You probably have.
Definitely. The obstacles in women and girls' pathway in terms of accessing support services for violence they're significant. I mean, I had a friend a couple of years ago who was killed by her partner. Her daughter was killed by her partner in New York City. She was very connected. She had access to information. She couldn't get out of that situation, and the support services were not there. And ultimately, I think when we're talking about a service that is related to trusting women and believing women, it's that much harder for them to access those services. So for your average New Yorker, your average American woman, it's very hard. Imagine being a new arrival Afghan woman or girl, and you need some level of support services. We are going to have to work in a significant way to make sure that they have access to services.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to go back to also, I think, when the Afghanistan crisis first started, it was okay, let's donate, let's donate, let's donate. I think there's a lot of ways for the people watching this show to help. And one of those ways is to, look up whatever you can look up. Rubicon does a lot of humanitarian and disaster work. You can look at Voice. There's a lot of Lutheran services. I have a page that I'm going to attach here with a bunch of different organizations. But get involved in helping to resettle these amazing people that are coming over that have nothing but one item of clothing. And have don't know anybody. Like, get involved, drive them from the airport, help set up the house that they're going to live in. There's a lot of different ways that you can help. Provide a room for them. Airbnb now has a program where you can provide a room for Afghan refugees who are coming, and it provides space for them to live while they get on their feet. There's so many ways you can help. What other ways do you think, Mendy and Yalda, the American public can help?
Y'all, did you want to go first, or do you want me to go? I mean, well, as we've noted, Yalda's situation is it's hard, but it's a unique situation, and the love and support from people that Yalda had no idea she'd ever meet, right, has been incredible. And I think that it's almost a case study that, Yalda, I think you and I should write about, because I think it's an example of what caring Americans can do. And the feminist allyship and sisterhood that has embraced Yalda and her family is massive. And it's a story that we need to hear about, because there are so many things that people can do, Americans can do, to welcome Afghan women and girls, to acknowledge that they're bringing incredible new diversity, resources, and skills into the United States, things that we can learn from, right? And it's a message that we all need to hear. And what might not seem like a huge donation from some perspectives is going to make a big difference in the life of that person.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you pointed out, Mendy, is too to know that even if the Afghanistan media cycle ends, right, the media stops paying attention to it, it doesn't mean that it's over just because CNN, is now posting about Donald Trump's stupid tweets again, or whatever. Well, he's not tweeting anymore, but his the riot on the Capitol in 2 days, which hopefully is gewollt.
Yeah, the crisis in many ways is just, it's not just begun, but we're going to be in this situation for a really long time. And we need people to keep trying to amplify the realities of Afghan women and girls, to understand what those realities are, be led by them, make sure that they're informing decisions that are made that are going to impact Afghan women and girls.
So, can people call their elected officials and tell them to prioritize support and safety for Afghan women and girls? Is that something people can do?
Absolutely. It's totally something people can do. We've been doing it for specific cases related to Afghanistan, and it's been pretty interesting in terms of some of the responses we've gotten from representatives. We are going to be launching a campaign in the coming days about people standing in solidarity with Afghan women and girls. Raise your voice, show Afghan women that we are standing in solidarity from all corners of the world, because I think that in itself is going to be significant. But there's other things that people can do. Find out where Afghans are going to land in the United States. Go volunteer. There are things that you could do to support, and make sure your donations are led by what is necessary, right? And listen to that. Don't end up donating a bunch of things that may not be what is the most essential and what might be needed, for example, by Afghan women and girls.
Well, what is most essential? What do you mean by that? Like, how does somebody know whether their donation is going to something that matters versus not?
I mean, it's a good question. Yalda, maybe you want to say a few things about what were some of those key things that you were immediately thinking about when you and your daughters landed in the United States, in terms of just things you're like, wow, we're going to need to figure this out, and this out.
As I said earlier, the first thing was the legal aid that we had to think of. When are we going to start working? When we will be able to have the right to work? How can we get asylum? Economy aside, because for me it was the angels were there to help me with the place and with the clothes and food and everything. But legal rights is something that awareness raising should be done, and the women should know what rights they have here, because we are coming from a country where we don't have lots of laws that support women. So this is something that we can think of. And I just want to go back to your last question, Samantha, the way that you asked your followers to support Afghan women. We have a lot of them stranded in Afghanistan. They are women's rights activists, they are journalists, and they are female prosecutors, and different categories of them. a humanitarian parole is open for them. Why don't you ask your followers, those who can sponsor these women, bring them in the US, help them get out of that situation that they are going through? They need a lot of support, and they shouldn't be just sidelined or get killed because they have been working for democracy and because they have been women, and they should have been working, and it's their right to be working and earn money in addition to any other thing.
Is there any program, like if humanitarian parole needs a sponsor, Mendy, is there any program that like sets up? Because I feel like there's a lot of people watching who might not know an Afghan woman that they want to sponsor. Like, is there any program that sets up kind of that link between sponsor and person like seeking humanitarian parole?
I mean, we've been talking as Voice in terms of some of our fundraising efforts to fundraise for flexible money so that we can actually get money into the hands of Afghan women, especially these Afghan women's rights defenders that Yalda is talking about. If we can get money to them, then they have choice. They have the ability to, if they can get on a flight, they could buy a ticket. If they think they need money to go across land, then they would be able to have access to money for that reason, right? I think the big thing is to go with an organization that is going to give choice to Afghan women to make decisions about how they need to use those resources. I think the humanitarian parole visa and the need to expedite that, I think share, as Yalda has, share information about that. Make sure that Afghans know that that's an option. If they need help in terms of filling out their paperwork, there are different kinds of organizations like Voice that are also working with women's rights defenders to help them get that paperwork complete in as different ways, in the ways that we can.
So on that note, we're posting a link to Voice Amplified. They're raising $50,000. If you want to support this important work, voiceamplified.org/Afghanistan, and we're putting that in the chat. Obviously, this is an amazing organization to support and that's doing incredible work. So I want to go into policy for a minute. In terms of, we asked about what should the American public be doing, but we saw this very kind of pathetic showing by, I mean, sorry, Anthony Blinken, I do think you're great, but this pathetic showing kind of by Anthony Blinken just spitting out, US government talking points about why we botched this so badly. Um, what do you feel like the US government should be doing now that we've pulled out?
I mean, there's a few things I think definitely the U.S. government has to do. I mean, it didn't need to be this way. It did not need to be so botched, right? We knew that Afghan women's rights defenders were going to be at risk. The U.S. government knew that, right? So we need to make sure that their cases are expedited, that they do get special assistance. They've given their lives in many ways by supporting the U.S. government while the U.S. government was there. We need to press Biden to make sure that Afghan American leadership is embraced and listened to, right? We need to make sure that the special U.S. envoy that he's going to appoint, let it be an Afghan American woman, right? Let's make sure
Wild
that
idea. Wild
right?
idea.
Wild idea.
Maybe it should be somebody from that population.
Exactly. Make sure that he is allocating at least $5 billion to civil society organizations working on Afghan-related issues. Make sure that that money is earmarked for women-led Afghan organizations. Right, there are different things that the U.S. government could do. Make sure that he has an expert group of Afghan women and other organizations like Voice and others who have expertise in humanitarian action and resettlement. Make sure that they are listening and informed by these kinds of actors, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a true opportunity for them. They can't write what they've done, right? But they can sure make a valuable contribution when they start authentically listening to Afghan women and girls.
Amazing. Yalda, any last words you want to say? We had one question. What are some of your hopes and dreams for Afghan women and girls?
Samantha, when you started your program, you were talking about fashion, you were talking about Angela Merkel, and you also talked about the legal ban on abortion in one of the states. And these are some of the fancy things that for a minute I went and thought of the Afghan women who are at the same time, when you are talking about the fashion and everything for women, they are fighting for their basic rights. And
Yeah.
it's such a pity in this time, like the 21st century, and you're still fighting for the right to go to school, to get education, to work, and to be counted as a human. So my last word again would be, although I was angry on an international community, and in one of my interviews I said I no more have messages for them. They left us alone in a situation that we needed them, and now that everything is gone, what should I say them? But this time I would ask everyone, first your followers, to support women in Afghanistan by, as I said, by sponsoring them and helping them, the women's rights defenders, specifically human rights defenders, to get out of Afghanistan and live a better life, at least where they don't have the concern of getting education and they are safe. And the second thing, if some of the people from the international community who are involved in decision making and policy making are watching, I'm asking them not to stay silent and don't look at the way that people in Afghanistan are being killed or being deprived of all of their rights. Terrorism in Afghanistan will not remain only in Afghanistan. It could spread as a cancer everywhere, and if they leave Afghanistan the way it is, it will have an effect on all the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Alda. So pointing out, I mean, that this is, we think that we've left Afghanistan, but part of the reason we were there was because it's a national security issue, and now a complete power vacuum is again going to be a huge national security issue for the U.S. And for other countries. Thank you so much, Yalda. Mendy, any kind of final words or thoughts you wanted to posit here?
I mean, I just want to say, Samantha, thanks for bringing Yalda and me onto this show. It's been a really great experience to be able to talk about this and to talk about it frankly, because I think that the people really need to understand the lived experiences and the realities of women and her daughter, like Yalda and her daughters, and to understand that there are things that we all can do. There are large and small actions that all of us can do to support Afghan women and girls.
Thank you so much, Mendy, and thank you for coming on the show. I know it's short notice to both of you for, for joining me here, for speaking openly and honestly and frankly with me as well. I think reflecting on a lot of things that, that need to be fixed, not just in Afghanistan, but also systems within the US. So thank you so much again for both being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Goodbye, ladies.
Bye.
And best of luck to you and your daughters, Yalda.
Thank you, Samantha.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye bye. Whew. Well, that was an amazing interview with two amazing women from Voice Amplified, a really great organization that's really centering the lives and lived experiences and perspectives of women and girls, and is also working really hard to stop violence against women. They're also doing a ton of work to get Afghan women's rights defenders out of the country who are very much at risk by the Taliban. And I think, one of the messages that we got in the last show from Rohila was, don't trust anything the Taliban says. And I'm slightly embarrassed that even the New York Times sometimes seems to be trusting what the Taliban says. And the problem is a lot of the live coverage has stopped. I was, shocked the other day when I saw that Reuters was stopping live coverage of Afghanistan. Reuters, I mean, because it's so dangerous. But that means that, the only things that we have to go on are people like Yalda or people that are within the country that are telling us what is going on. And we need to listen to them and know that the Taliban is just trying to gain favor with the US government and other Western governments because they don't want to be a pariah because they're now going to be a government. So again, we put the website there, voiceamplified.org. If you want to donate, if you want to support the work of Voice Amplified and to support women and girls like Yalda and her daughters, please consider donating even just a little bit. If you can't donate money, again, think about donating time. I'm going to post a list of all different organizations that you can volunteer for in the places where people are being resettled, whether it's again setting up a home for them or just saying hi and having a coffee with them and taking them around the city that you live in and showing it to them. It doesn't have to be money. You can also donate airline miles. There are just so many ways that you can help these Afghan refugees. And also, I, for one, am really excited to have these amazing, resilient people in our country who undoubtedly will become entrepreneurs and have been through so much. So, let's. I think the American way is to really support people and to support refugees and to support people coming from these adverse circumstances and just show that we are a nation of immigrants and we want to welcome immigrants that are coming from circumstances like my family who was escaping anti-Semitism, or some that were escaping the Holocaust, or persecution in Russia, persecution in Ireland. So many of our families came here escaping persecution. So have the compassion for the Afghan refugees just as if that they were your family. End of my spiel for tonight. I want to give a big thank you to these amazing women for coming on the show. I also want to highlight our really generous, amazing sponsor, James Anthony Jewelers. If you are going to be proposed to soon, or you're looking to propose a DC based local business who can create custom, absolutely gorgeous engagement rings at a fraction of the price for what you would normally pay because there's no brick and mortar overhead, we put his website in the chat, but it's James, Jaems, Anthony.com, and reach out to him. Just show him a picture of what you're thinking about, and he'll give you a quote and show you your options. Also, a big thank you to Stream Inspectors. They are the they are the leaders in live stream production. They have done this show pro bono for a year now, and I am just so incredibly grateful of all the work. I'm getting teary eyed now of all the work that Zach and his team has done to support women's voices and organizations like this to be able to tell their stories to the American public. So thank you to Stream Inspectors. Lastly, Empower Global, my company. If your company is looking for diversity and inclusion training, you want to teach people to be nicer to each other, to work across countries better, to inclusively facilitate a virtual conference or virtual event. Empower Global also has a women's leadership program, which is our signature program. Our virtual cohort is now full, but we are accepting applications still for our program that is starting in October in Washington, D.C. And it's to teach women how to be incredible, passionate social justice pioneers like these women we saw today. Next week, tune in. We are going to be talking about the Texas abortion law in greater detail with the head of lobbying for the Center for Reproductive Rights. So tune in again next week. And until then, this is Samantha Carlin signing off. I'll see you next week. Thanks everyone for watching. Oh, sorry. Lastly, Zach's gonna kill me. If you liked the show, if you thought it was important, we don't, make money off of this show. We do it because it's a public service. Please consider supporting our Patreon. Our lowest subscription starts at $3 a month. That's literally less than the price of a Starbucks. I think it's even less than a Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Please consider supporting us on Patreon so that we can continue this important work and can continue to highlight voices like Yalda and Mendy's here today. And if you like this episode, if you thought it was important, like it, share it, comment on it. We also have it on YouTube. Please, this is a really important issue, and it's really important that we embrace refugees and that we deal with the Afghanistan situation in the best way possible because we are, frankly, partially responsible for it. So share this episode, tell people how they can volunteer. Now I'm really done. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.